Hello, Silas here. I'm back with Steven. Can say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Trying to find a different way to do all these. Trying to get it upbeat enough to get you guys hooked and actually get you actually to listen, guys, gals, and everything else in between. Let me be its current ear and we can get along on this conversation of ours. So back with Steven in a conversation series discussing different things, and we have several of these where we read different things and then we come in and discuss those things that we've read. And in this one, we're reading, or Stephen has read, Why We Believe in God, parentheses S, A Concise Guide to the Science of Faith by J. Anderson Thompson, Clare Aukofer, that we're thinking that was a Western African name, and Richard Dawkins. And Stephen, tell us a bit about this book and how you found it and why we're discussing it.
Sure. So this book explores why people develop religious beliefs, approaching it through an evolutionary psychology, anthropological, and neuroscientific standpoint. It touches on each of these, draws heavily on Darwin's work, heavily on certain adaptations that evolved over time, a little bit into genetics, although, of course, we're not going to delve in deep in terms of specific genes and all that. But some of these ideas is how they evolved over time. I found out about this book through James Lindsay. He mentioned it, and he said, it's a very short, concise book, but it explains things very well, which, of course, I agree with. It's about 100 pages, but it packs a lot of information in a very short time. And the way I like to describe it is think of this book as we walk through it as it's a puzzle. The whole puzzle is why we believe in a god or gods, and that each thing we talk about is a piece of the puzzle. So once you look at each section of this, you're like, okay, it makes sense now. It's not we have a gene or there's a part of our brain that generates a belief in God. It's all these various things working together that result in these beliefs. And I think it's a very fascinating subject. I think that as neuroscience and genetics gets further and further along, we're going to find even more on this.
Yeah. And okay, with me, this is a topic that's been fascinating to me. Belief is something that is key. I think we all have things we believe in.
Yeah.
Now, faith, I think, is a separate thing than belief. They're often conflated, but I think they're two separate things.
Yeah.
These kind of situations where why would you need two words if they mean the same thing? I know it is sometimes in a transitionary period where some words can be changing or one thing can morph and then one word. First, for the multiple freezings here, apologies again. Shall try to improve on this, but I'm talking about the way definitions and words change. Sometimes they are in flux, but how long does it take for a word to actually change from one thing to something else? Sometimes like, the dictionary definition, but in general, the dictionaries are useful. It's useful for words to mean things. Words don't have to mean a specific thing, like one thing alone, but when you use a word, it should be defining something. Like
Yeah.
you should be able to at least say that by this word, I mean, if I had a longer time to talk to you, this is the paragraphs or booklet or whatever that I mean by this one word. But I find it frustrating when people kind of let that they use this. We were just talking before this about how some people seem to use words freezing again. So here I was talking about how some people use words as magic spells trying to get something over you, being intentionally deceptive. Now getting back into it now. Or they're just using a word that they don't understand the meaning of. It seems to be increasingly people will be using a word with the intention to make you feel and act a certain way because they're not able to convince you with actual evidence. And when it comes to these specific type of people that I'm speaking about, it's often used in that sense, and that's kind of the sense that I refer to in this. This is borrowed from Matt Dillahunty, and he says faith is the excuse we give when we don't have evidence. Because if you actually had evidence for a belief, for saying you think something is the way it is, you normally tend to provide that evidence. But often when you talk to people and they will start giving you, oh, but the historian, oh, but there's been this example in the life, and then you start breaking it down. Okay, I know you said this person said this. I know you said you've experienced this, but could it be this other thing? Are you confident that this person was completely right about this? Because was that person there? That person had thought it was something else. They said, "Oh, why are you trying to take faith away from people? Faith makes people stronger. Faith makes people feel this." It doesn't. To me, it's still wrong. It's still inaccurate. And if you say something is something, I would rather you actually be as accurate as possible about that thing, or just say you don't know. And I have no problem saying there's a whole bunch of things you don't know. And I think that is saying you don't know is a more conducive to both continued human flourishing than saying I know it's this. Because once you say it's that, you start shutting off potential venues of knowledge to yourself and other people to possibly actually learn more things that could actually help people in those certain fields, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone got to listen to my recent show with Adam Patrick, but he and I sort of disagreed a little on this because he's more into the mystical or magical, as he says, and I'm more of the belief that we should keep asking questions and keep figuring things out. Like, I don't see it as we can know too much. Like, I'm curious to see how the brain works. I'm curious to see how genes operate. Now, you could make the argument that with certain things like with genes, yes, people can use that information for bad things, like selling that information to insurance companies. They could charge you more, but that's only one aspect of it. The positive aspect is if you know you're susceptible to certain things, you can adapt your life accordingly. Oh, you could potentially have blood pressure issues. Okay, keep your blood pressure under control. Oh, you're more susceptible to cholesterol issues. Okay, cut back on things. It gives you the tools in which to live a better, healthier life because now you have that information. Yes, people could abuse that or manipulate that. Like we've also been talking about Wall Street bets, hedge funds, Robinhood selling the information to hedge funds, things like that. But at the same time, because of the internet and because of all these communities, we're also able to dig up a lot of this information and adapt accordingly. So overall, more information is better, as I know Silas and I both agree on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when it comes to belief, why I think this is important is when you come to a belief in God, it's very hard for people to claim that this can be a personal belief.
Yeah.
Because in general, you're claiming that this is knowledge you have about how the entire creation came to be. So not just yourself. If you truly say, okay, this is my personal God and the created just me and affects just my life, then there could be an extent for that to be a personal God. And you can say at most it's dealing with people that you actually associate with, then they could have some interest in your actual God. But for most people who do have a belief in God currently, it's a God of all creation. So that's a God that created people they never met, people that have died thousands of years before they existed, people that would live thousands of years after they exist, places that they've never been to or intend to be to. Those are places under the auspices and control of this being that they claim to have some knowledge of. That is not a personal worldview.
No.
Like, if you have something like a belief and you can say, okay, I believe monogamy is the best way to have a relationship, and I also decide I've never met somebody I'm willing to enter a relationship with, that is a very personal belief because I'm not really applying it to anyone. If somebody talks to me why, I'm like, I'm not dating you. Why do you really need to know? That's okay. Okay, I can see somebody arguing that because I say for me, that's what I consider most important. Then if I go out and I say, okay, I want to actually date people, and I put that in my dating profile, I start meeting people and I say, I'm into monogamy. Now, if I'm in a relationship with somebody and that person starts asking me for reasons, they, I think, are entitled to have those questions. And if I intend them to have that relationship with me, it's my prerogative. It's on me to actually go and actually inform them and convince them that this is it, or actually check and make sure that they're actually on the same field as I am. So if we do enter this relationship, it is monogamous. Now, at that point, my personal belief has now become a shared belief among people who. So I had a bit of a freezing there, so I'm going to just explain a bit what I was talking about. We're talking about that personal belief for that one thing. It's just you and yourself. It's something that you do on your own. But most beliefs, most things have applications. We're social animals, so we deal with people. We deal with other people. Now, if you have this belief and you take it to this group point where it's you and one or more other people, you can all choose to agree on this for various reasons, and that's entirely positive. But we live in a society, we have different hierarchies, different people have different power. What happens then? In order to have his chosen people be monogamous, you get in a position of power. You start dictating that everybody else must have that monogamous relationship. Everybody else must be in a monogamy, not just have one if you're in one, but start saying, okay, we have to put people together because people who are single are upset. If you cheat on somebody, that's going against this perfect way of actually being. So you have these severe punishments. If you want to enter more of an open relationship, you're going to be shunned and kicked out of our. So that's where a personal belief, something that started personal, if it's just your own, can be that. But depending on who you actually apply that and the veracity of that belief that changes that from something where it's hardly personal to something that is universal in a sense where it's very concerning. So I'm personally very interested why certain people believe in gods. I'm interested at why I was raised in the religions that I was raised in and the struggles that I had to accept and actually get that belief. And to me, something like belief isn't something that you really willingly come into. Like there's girls I had a crush on. I don't know the exact time when I thought all of a sudden this was somebody who's actually attractive that I have a crush on versus them just being a random person that I know. And I don't know the point where I actually believed that they liked me too, or I don't know the point where I fell out of that belief that this is somebody that I feel like I should be in. We don't really choose that actively, but it is affected by different sort of information that you have about the thing. So with this belief, it's been very interesting so far. We've gone through 7 chapters. We'll be on chapter 8 to hear about the studies into why we have this belief, because it's something that is rather common, especially specifically when it comes to gods. Why did the convention or idea of gods be socially constructed? Because we've had beliefs before that, we've had faith before we had gods. And I think arguably the concept of gods probably will go away. I'm open to them being an entity called a god, but not one that none that I've heard of are convincing. But I think that concept might always be with us, that possibility. But in general, faith and belief will continue to be strong, despite I think a reduction in the belief of a entity that classically fits the definition of what a god being is. So I think that's it for my intro.
Well, I think it sort of also ties into Jungian archetypes, like the idea that we look up to certain things with certain values, and that those will always have some sort of form. So for the Greeks and the Romans, it was Zeus is the heroic father figure, Ares is the fighter, Aphrodite or Venus is the beautiful woman. Like those archetypes will keep recurring. Like we may not, we in the future will not worship beings we believe on live on Mount Olympus or whatever like that, but there will still be that attraction to those ideas, and I think there is something about that for sure.
Yeah, and from my personal experience, before I started looking into these topics, I've noticed that gods were kind of invented or kind of came into creation, came into at least the stories that we tell, came to be entities as part of the stories we tell. Once we were, of course, sentient enough to figure out that there was actually elements that seemed to have some kind of regularity and organization outside of us. And we also had the knowledge that us as human beings, us as living creatures, had the ability to control and organize things that would continue to happen and occur outside of us actually being there. We understood, okay, we have kids, we brought this kid in life, but this kid will have their own kids, those kids will have their own kids, we'll go on. We're conscious of that. And we realize if we plant this tree, I may never see this tree be fully grown, but I understand that because I planted this tree, someone somewhere else will have the fruits of those trees. And then we started thinking all these other things in reality exist. So it kind of made some sense for us to kind of think like, we don't know what those things are, but since we've seen the things that we can do, there's a possibility that there's those other beings out there. So as you mentioned, these are concepts that have been built by humans in the general shape and understanding of the things that we can do, and understanding that there's things that are more powerful, there's effects and existences beyond our simple human three-dimensional in this temporal time knowledge. So I think gods were part of human beings' attempt to try and account for that unknown, those known unknowns. And I think that structure, with some of the knowledge that we have aware to us, at least needs a relooking at. We need to revamp that idea in a similar way how at the time it was animism, then it moved to paganism, polytheism, then it moved to monotheism. I argue that we've got to some metheism type of situation, but I am personally a religious, and I think we can enter a kind of post-overtly mystical religious type of way of thinking while still having evaluation and complete knowledge and actually a complete acceptance of just the grandeur of existence. To me, it's this. There's no concept that I've heard of a god that is more amazing than just like the minute things I know about the size of the solar system, let alone the universe. It's just like I feel they're very limited and very old and just very decrepit type of structures to really that limit us from the true awe of existence that's out there. Yeah.
We talked a bit about this before the conversation started, but I read Silas some stuff from Nietzsche, and one of his final projects, unfortunately, he wasn't able to finish it, but it was the transvaluation of all values. And his idea was that he's not, we talked about master and slave morality. He's not arguing, let's go back to the Greek and Roman ways of living. I mean, that's not even possible. But at the same time, let's not just carbon copy Christianity into a secularized version as the SJWs and others have either. It's like we have to look at all these different value systems and decide what are the best values to have. And look, I understand that this is hard work. This, is scary for a lot of people, but I think long run it'll lead us to a much better place. And I think that was ultimately his argument. Yeah.
Yeah, and from my estimation, despite what the media and coverage might show us, I think we are heading that way. And in fact, I think that is part of why some people are that much more terrified about the negative things we see, because they are in general, they tend to be so much more of a contrast to our day-to-day lives. Most of you hearing this have lived in an area where your expectations of general physical safety and security and cooperation is much higher than has existed in most of humanity. So when you see some of the brutality that occurs, that's also, again, much lower than the level of brutality that's mostly been there, especially by these institutions. Like a basic weekend activity for most civilized places that were considered the most civilized places in the world for majority of its history, were like, hey, let's go watch the guillotine. Let's go watch the public hanging. Let's go watch the drawing and quartering of a human being.
Yeah.
And people would just go there. It's like the kings and queens and we're there, the elites and speak, watching that. But now we had a case with Derek Chauvin, whether you want to agree or not, if there was doubt or if the person was in there, where people see that, they like recoil to that and they think like, and to me, it's kind of shocking. Like some people literally think, and there are crazy people in the world, and it's still in our genetic history that's in there. And I think that's part of the things we've discussed, part of the reason we've developed these things. Think about the gods that we talk about. The gods that we talk about are just bloody, thirsty, horrific, rapists, murderers, like genocidal. Like they're not good beings. Even if they did exist, I'm glad they don't exist in many cases. But you had those situations where people literally think like some guy who was hired to protect and serve the people just sat there and killed somebody while being recorded and was like, just I don't care. I'm going to get away with this. That's how majority of history has been. That's how many places in the world are. It's not the United States of America, despite what majority of the people might say. There's still people who do that. But I think people seeing that and imagining that's there really makes them fear like losing all the positive things that they have in society and culture. And I think that's why you see people saying, oh, we have to adopt this new thing because those negative things come from this bad thing. And some other people are saying, oh, we need to bring Christianity back because these negative things came from like the loss of that. And to me, this is part of a process, an ongoing process for me, and I think for Stephen as well, and the other people who appreciate this kind of content, of trying to find what is it, as you said, that did make, in my opinion, the West the best current result of the best way that humans have figured out how to devise society. And that did involve belief in certain gods. And I think this is more specific about the gods itself, but there's some aspects about it of why are there certain aspects in the West that affected the belief in gods in a specific way and molded it and changed it in different ways. And I don't think that's necessarily going to come up in this book. Does it get into specific like Western beliefs of it, or is it more in these last couple of chapters? Is it?
I mean, he talks a little bit about like I mentioned in the last section, I think it was about how we see Islamic terrorists and we're surprised at them because we're used to in the West, a lot of people are not strict adherence to what the Bible says. So we're used to people saying, oh, I follow this religion, but kind of half-ass it. Then that gets into, well, how much of it is because of the religion versus in spite of the religion. But we forget, like, there are people who actually will dogmatically adhere to what the book says. So he touches on things like that a little bit, but he doesn't break it down specifically like, oh, well, in the East, they value these things because of this. In the West, he doesn't really get into that so much.
Okay. But one thing I would propose is earlier on, when I was talking about the different levels of beliefs in monogamy and things like that, at that personal level, I say in Europe, when they talk about it, we have these high level of atheist places. I think that would be the kind of level of beliefs that they have. Most of their beliefs in whether it's a supernatural or the exterior things are rather personal to themselves. And then they get to the point, I think in the United States of America, it's more that higher level of it is more of that secondary one where they'll share their beliefs with the people they choose to associate with. but there's a lot less of the people who are saying let's advocate it on it. Yes, people talk about certain key issues like abortion, like capital punishment, and a few things, and they say, okay, that's coming into the press that you should do actual actions. Might be some freezing here. Not quite sure.
Yeah, you
Did it
skipped
drop
out.
off? Okay, yeah, that's just pretty much what I was trying to say was when people say they believe, if you don't actually act on it on that kind of third level, I'm kind of apathetic to your claim of belief. It doesn't really affect me too much, but my interest is mostly on those third level people who I believe this being did this and wants us to do this, so I'm going to do that. That's the thing that interests me, that I'm glad to actually learn more information on why people believe certain things, why I was unable to believe certain things, why I believe the things that I believe now, and so forth. But yeah.
Well, yeah, it's
Anything
interesting
else?
because well, one thing I was going to add to your sort of point is like I've thought about this in my own life, like the non-denominational Christians who are like, oh, I follow the Bible, sort of. Oh, I don't really like organizational life. So I'm sort of torn here, like which position I'm more critical of. Because on the one hand, the people with the organized religion are just kind of because the thing is, the people with the organized religion are just doing what they're told, and as somebody who's very we use the term, what is it, promiscuous teleology, like you want to understand the purpose of everything, like how children are. I mean, I'm still like that even, at 32 years old. But so someone who's just like, well, I follow this because it's what my church is, what I was told, I'm critical of that. But at the same time, my criticism of this other category is they're picking and choosing the parts that are convenient and then whitewashing the other stuff. And then it ultimately their base are based on a giant genetic fallacy. It just comes down to, well, I pick and choose the parts that I say are right, that I want to follow, and I'm going to look the other way on other stuff. So I'm criticizing both, but like I'm not really sure which is better or worse, because you could make the case that you could make the case that the people who follow the organized stuff, they're principled and they're committed, but on the other hand, the latter category, they acknowledge that, okay, there are certain things I can't accept and shouldn't accept, but at the same time, if it all just becomes self-reference, well, it just comes down to what you feel like doing, and then it's like that runs into hypocrisy and other things. So I'm kind of like, I mean, obviously, I'm criticizing both positions, but it's like I kind of take issues with each for different reasons.
Yeah. I'm, I think maybe the people who are fundamentalists, who live by the book, might be easier to deal with because you can learn the content and be able to predict what they'll do.
Yeah.
But the ones who pick and choose are easier to live among when you don't have to directly deal with them, because the chances are they'll pick and choose things that are just generally profitable to them. So you don't necessarily have to, it won't necessarily be, there wouldn't be certain points where they would act rather irrationally to just basic good and bad things. They still have the general good and bad, and they're just like, you just need to figure out what is generally good and bad for humans in this environment, and chances are they'll find a way to do just the thing that's generally positive.
Yeah.
Yet with the people who are true believers, there's going to be certain situations where even if this is generally positive due to something that they have a strong belief in, it's something you will not be able to make them budge on. So if you're dealing with them, you'll be able to know to avoid going there and try to find other ways. Whereas if you're living among people, they would in general just try to get the most favorable situation and then go post facto rationalization of why they're not following this part of it. So I don't know. That's a good question. And yeah, for the people listening, let us know what you think. Is it better to deal with which one you might have more contempt with or more affinity with, the fundamentalists or the cherry pickers of dogma? It'd be interesting
I'm
to
a
see.
Catholic. I'm a pro-choice Catholic. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because this was it's interesting. Like, I just want to ask, do you believe you know enough about the being that? I guess if you believe you know what the being wanted us to do, you can also take it further and say you believe you know who didn't translate what the being meant. I don't know. It's a quagmire. Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
ready to jump right in. If you want.
Okay, so we'll jump in on chapter 8. We've done 7 chapters so far. I'm thinking from what I've recorded, we've done two recordings. I think we might have the 2 separate recordings, and we'll have the 1 recording of the definitions. And then now this one, it's going to be a lot longer for these parts, and these might be individual chapters, chapter 8, 9, and 10. As Steven said, it's a book. Its links are going to be below, or wherever you listen to this, there will be links available for you to get the book yourself and read through it. Stephen has read through it, and he'll read some excerpts and give us some thoughts, and then we'll discuss different parts as we go through it. So yeah, hit us up with chapter 8. Wherever two or more of you are gathered, harnessing brain chemistry through the ritual. I like this title. It's, I think, playing on the thing from the Bible. Like, you don't have to go to church. Like, wherever few of you are gathered, you can, I'm among you, and things like that. So yeah.
Sure. All right. So Darwin says, the formation of different languages and of distinct species and the proofs that both have developed through a gradual process are curiously parallel. Religious rituals are byproducts of mental mechanisms originally designed for other purposes. We have seen how the individual mind can generate, accept, and believe religious ideas. If process stopped with the individual, however, religion likely wouldn't have lasted. Rituals have the ability to create intense emotional experiences and give rise to feelings such as self-esteem, pleasure, fear, motivation, pain, relief, and attachment. The group nature of a ritual takes minds already primed for belief and throws them into a continuous loop of mutual reinforcement, creating a collection of conscious and unconscious forces. In essence, all religions play on this. They are illustrated well by studying 3 surviving populations of hunter-gatherers. The Concise of Africa, he says in the Book of Africa, but I looked it up and I saw it's west edge of the Kalahari Desert, Ovambo land in Botswana. I'm not super familiar with them, but that's what I found. There's another tribe living in the Bay of Bengal's Andaman Islands, and they're also the Australian Aborigines. I think everyone knows who they are. What do all their religious rituals have in common? Song, dance, and trance. Why? These rituals harness our powerful brain chemicals which stimulate the emotions listed above. You see echoes of these rituals in surviving faiths today. Thoughts and comments before we continue?
Yeah. With this one, I kind of talk about the World Wrestling Federation or Professional Wrestling, WWE now, about how when I was a kid, I used to watch it and thought it was real. And I was this big argument. I would get into strong arguments with people who would say it was false. I was like, no, it's real. It's really real. I remember being a kid in Kenya. I was like 6 or 7, and having heard some rumor. At this time, you didn't have the whole international news type things. We had like 3 television channels in Kenya at the time that we'd get, and there would be very few things from America. So occasionally we'd get like a VCR of like a WrestleMania, and I heard this thing that like Undertaker had been knocked down and he was laying flat, and then he just stood up like a rake, like just like straight up, and I was completely confident that he did it. And he was like levitated, because that was like the stories that you were told. But then eventually I kept watching it. Me and my brother were watching it, and we realized as in our teens that we got to the point where it's like, okay, I think it might have been early teens or so, that it was fake. It's not fake, but it's an act. It's a show. It's sports entertainment, and it was still popular to us. It was still interesting to us, and it still has. I mean, the viewership has dropped, but it's still something that people still find exciting because there's still storylines, there's still things. When you go and you watch Avengers, I used to read the comic books and like, this is amazing. And now you see it on the big screen, like that's also amazing. Like all these things like that. I don't really think Chris Evans is Captain America, but it's still entertaining. It's still moving. I can still, because the content is still there. The storytelling is still there. The action and the emotive nature of it is still there. And one of the things that makes me quite suspicious about continued belief into it, and as I was saying before, people say faith is you're taking this away from somebody. I'm like, no, reality is more amazing. Like even the fact that people came up with these grand stories, and something I mentioned in the last conversation was that we've looked at these different religions and different places from these different disparate people in different locations, and we start seeing certain similarities. Like, oh, humans in this place behave in this certain way, but they're trying to express the same thing. To me, that shows that common earthliness that we have, and to me, that's more amazing. But for some people, there seems to be something about the belief systems that if they find out that it's not real, they really fall out of it and really takes out a core part of it. So that is the part to me, like why do people find and build so much on this to feel that it has to be this kind of way? Like if we find out it's not real, we still can't learn from it. I'm like, that's kind of tough. Like if you find that God told you not to murder, all of a sudden you'll think murdering is okay. I don't think you will.
No.
But some people seem to make that argumentation, and it's interesting and cool to me to see that people can still participate in these things, these rituals, even if they're not divine, even if they're not something else, even if it's not something you're directly a part of, you can still partake in and get some excitement out of it. Yeah.
I'll get into this more as this section goes on, but you'll see some interesting parallels, not just in religion, but other things too. I think we may have touched on it before, but what fraternities do with hazing, and they have like certain songs they sing together, things like that. You think of certain sports fans, like people doing the wave all at once or like cheering all at once. I even thought certain politicians giving speeches, like if you watch like the video footage of like Hitler giving a speech and like everyone stands up and does a salute and the marching band plays, it sort of plays on some of these things. Like it's that whole group ritual of like everyone acting in unison, everyone like looks up to something, everyone does the same motion. I think it says later in here, but it talks about how if people all do these certain movements in unison, it'll actually reduce pain, it'll enhance energy, things like that. And there's some there it's been argued there's some sort of biological reason, because the idea is it's to sort of foment group cooperation. So it's like we're hardwired to do a lot of these things. It manifested in different ways, whether it's religion, sports, somebody speaking, fraternity, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll see some of these patterns play out in other things, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, there's a reading on self-reliance. It's Ralph Waldo Emerson, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That we're going to do a conversation on after this. It's going to be a breakdown. It's going to be super exciting. It's an amazing piece. But there was a line in there where he says, "I like the silence in the church before the preacher comes in and starts preaching." It's paraphrasing what before the preaching. And for me as well, like I still enjoy going to the churches and buildings like that and seeing that. But one thing specific, the preaching, yes, I'm not much a fan of it. But the grandeur of the rituals, like you said, with a group kind of activity, there's still something in that. Like,
yeah,
there's this one song by, it's like I forget, it's called The Blessing. It's by Elevation Church. The first time I saw it was in a meme talking about like who's going to pay the stimulus money. It's like the children,
oh
like all the children.
yeah.
So there's a song where it's a grand song where you hear it and you see the performance, or it's like a 12-minute thing, and the people are performing and the people are singing, and you feel like people are like, oh yes, Jesus, yes, like the children, and you get into it. Like I'm completely a-religious as they come, but I still hear that song and can sing along to it. Things like Ave Maria, those things are still in there. When you see this kind of group effort and these group events, I went to this church in with a mutual friend of ours in New York. There's this one New Age church. It's like in this theater and play Hillsong, and they sing the songs. It's like this party kind of environment. Even if you don't know the language being spoken or the things, or you like, it's just something that kind of moves into you. And these things do tap into that, and that is something that I think is definitely true. And I think even if you aren't a believer in religion and faith, there's things to value and see that there's some things that are worthwhile in there that I think can also exist outside of those things. It's just that some of the people who believe seem to attribute those things to specifically those faiths, when I'm like, no, those faiths have been using things that have been working in humanity. And I think it's good to experience. If you aren't a believer, go check some of these out. If you are a believer, go check out other belief systems and see those things, and also find some secular situations that might be doing a similar type of thing, and see if that also doesn't spark something in you. But being social animals, there's genetic rewards for being sociable in general. Yeah.
Well, the reason I brought up the Hitler thing too is I thought of this thing in the King's Speech where the royal family is listening to him speak, and there's that line about Nazi uniformed men frightening to the powerful to the eye and frightening to the imagination or something, and then it shows Hitler giving one of his passionate speeches, and then the king says, I guess Queen Elizabeth, when she's little, what's he saying? I don't know, but he's saying it very well. And then the marching band strikes up Deutschland über alles, the national anthem, and then he salutes first, and everyone follows, and you just see everyone kind of, I'm not going to do it, but like, hand up in there, Nazi salute, and then, I don't want to get this video flagged. And then, you see the men in uniform walking by with their flags and stuff, and everyone's just kind of like proudly saluting them. So it plays on all these themes. It's just, I mean, we can debate Hitler's religious views. I like that book that says he was a pantheist. I think that's a plausible thing. But it's like it does play on all these same things. Yeah. All right.
I think one of the good examples to think of with this thing is a place like North Korea, when you see that how ostensibly the control and the thing, but the people are in dire straits. They have very little information about the outside world, but it's a situation where I think Christopher Hitchens called it a necrocracy. Because the Kim Jong Un or Kim Jong Il, Okay, right now it's Kim Jong Un. No,
Kim Jong Un is current. Kim Jong
Kim
Il
Jong
was the
Un.
one before.
Kim
Yeah,
Jong Il, and then Kim Jong Sung was the first one.
I think so.
So Kim Jong Sung is still the president. He's still the god, and then his son Kim Jong Il was the next one, and he was kind of just president standing in for him, and then now it's like third way down standing in for his dad, who was standing in for the grandfather. So the religion is kind of tied in. They don't have an outside religion besides the state, and they also have those big parades and pomp while the people are just living in just dire straits. But that's still something that many North Koreans, at least the ones that escape, say it's just part of the culture. It's part of the belief system. Like you go talk to an actual North Korean, most of them don't really break out of that. And these things are effective. It's very effective, and it is something in us. There are reasons beyond simple indoctrination to why we do believe in gods, and this is a good conversation on that. But yeah.
Yeah. And, I say this probably every day, but that's the thing I always criticize too about how these are quote unquote atheist philosophies, but they're not as atheistic as they claim to be by any stretch.
Yeah.
Oh. All right. All right. Next section. The brain chemistry of ritual. Cells within the brain communicate through neurotransmitters. Every animal with a central nervous system has serotonin, the oldest of a class of neurotransmitters called monoamines. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Serotonin neurons are in the brainstem and send projections throughout the brain for a variety of reasons, including gross and repetitive motor movement. But perhaps the most important function in regard to this topic is how it regulates our self-esteem in accordance with social feedback. If a person is fired from their job, their serotonin levels and activity will decrease, and the loss in social standing will likely trigger depression, irritability, impulsivity. If a person who's promoted to a prestigious position, say president of the United States, serotonin levels would shoot way up. Modern antidepressants like Prozac increase serotonin activity. If you were to read while sitting down, the serotonin neurons in your brain would be moving at about 3 cycles per second. If you are up moving around, it would be 5. When you do heavy exercise, it's even higher. I think this point is actually interesting, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but they've actually said that I know Aristotle and some of the other philosophers were big on learning while walking around. They didn't believe in sitting at a desk. They wanted people to walk around and talk. So I wonder if that sort of plays into this, at least to a degree. All right, let's see. Let's see here. Another monoamine transmitter is dopamine, generally associated with pleasure. The nucleus accumbens, sorry if I'm butchering some of these words, I'm not familiar with all of them, part of our brain lights up with pleasure in response to certain stimuli, such as food, sex, and drugs. This is what triggers the quote-unquote do-it-again feeling of something like fast food cravings. Dopamine is for more than just pleasure, though. It is also involved with muscle function, repetitive compulsive behavior, and the uncontrollable repetition of a certain response. The neurologist Oliver Sacks found in 1973 that a dopamine analog could revive catatonic patients. Dopamine also helps designate what we should consider important to anticipate a reward. Let's see. The last of the monoamine neurotransmitters is epinephrine and non-epinephrine, also known as adrenaline and non-adrenaline. Adrenaline increases our heart rates, makes us feel anxious, focuses our attention, and causes us to sweat. It provides temporary bursts of strength, such as a mother lifting a car to free her child. Oxytocin is important in religious rituals because of its bonding properties. During childbirth, a mother's brain releases a massive dose of oxytocin in response to cervical and vaginal dilation. Breastfeeding triggers a letdown response for milk, which stimulates more oxytocin. Oxytocin loosens the mother's other attachments and help her focus on, commit to, and attach to the infant. Oxytocin also increases during sexual arousal, and an orgasm releases a bunch of it. So this is that whole thing about, they talk about women become bonded to men they have sex with. This is why. Oxytocin generates trust, love, generosity, and empathy in both sexes. It reduces fear and likely has a positive impact on all our social emotions. Endorphins, the last neurochemicals in regards to religion, are our internal opiates. The word actually comes from the term endogenous morphine. The main function is to block pain when injury occurs, and they are produced by exercise, excitement, pain, touch, laughter, music, orgasm, chili peppers, and the placenta. If you were to scan the brain of a runner or someone who did intense exercises, their endorphin receptors would light up. This increase would also cause what's called a runner's high. You probably had that if you exercise really hard, you feel almost high afterward. That's what that's a result of. Likely the reason for the endorphin rush was survival. Lots of exercise likely meant risk of injury from hunting and or being hunted. If injury did occur, the endorphins would allow a sense of control, at least until the threats were gone. Endorphins also facilitate social bonds and increase the release of dopamine. This is a cycle unique to neurotransmitters. Although they each serve a specific function, they overlap and can stimulate each other, creating unique combinations which tie into religious rituals. Although our ancestors clearly didn't understand this scientifically, they stumbled upon combinations of activities that could stimulate and boost serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, non-epinephrine, oxytocin, and endorphins, creating brain activity unique to those combinations. This is key to understanding the lasting of religious rituals in all cultures because there's literally nothing else like them. The word religion likely comes from the Latin religare, which means to tie or to bind. As we have discussed, our ancestors established social groups, but this created other problems too. Groups could experience internal conflicts and differences, which, if not resolved, could lead to a breakdown of the group. If a group member were punished, this could risk revenge from the person's kins or friends. But unseen forces, such as dead ancestors or gods, could determine punishment and reinforce tribalism easily and with constant vigilance. Ryan McKay and his colleagues in Zurich, Switzerland, and England did a study on this. Participants who were given subliminal religious suggestions, quote-unquote religious priming, when determining punishment of unfair behavior in others, tended to punish more severely than others. Participants were subliminally primed with religious primes, secular punishment crimes, or control primes. Religion increased costly punishment, clearly trumping the other two groups. Two mechanisms apply here. The quote-unquote supernatural watcher mechanism and the other was the religious activation of cultural norms about fairness and enforcement. The creation of gods or ancestor worship, sorry, I almost dropped my pen. The creation of gods or ancestor worship made sense, albeit unconsciously, to understand the world and creating rituals to communicate with them made sense as the next logical step. But if the rituals involved unseen and powerful forces, how did people manage to accept that these beings could hold power? This brings us back to the building blocks of beliefs, the perception of a power higher than ourselves, and being able to communicate or interact with that power. Then as now, God, parentheses S, was a byproduct of the mind's cognitive mechanisms. All right, a lot there if you want to jump in and comment and well, whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two things. With one, it's with the belief systems, we evolved. I think we evolved long enough as social beings in groups of, I think it was like 100 to 150, where that's like been found testing wise to be around the full group size we were in for a long enough time, and it's hard to really, for most people, to on average, that's the maximum or the range of people you can truly actually hold in your mind as entities, as part of your existence. So when you have these people jumping in and out and pulling in and out different ideas, maybe it's hard to get 100 to 150 people that believe kind of the similar things that you believe. So it's harder for you to really have the comfort of that belief system, whereas in the past, chances are you knew at least 95% of the people who were part of that 100 to 150 people had a similar language, similar beliefs, similar customs as you did. So that was something more similar to, it was something more comfortable. And I think that could explain part of the tension and have some other things on part of why there might be some social tension. What do you think about that in that actual aspect?
In terms of like, what do you mean by it? Do you mean in terms of like the group and how well it bonds them and things like that?
Yeah, like what was
I think what you're getting at is that there's a certain optimal level at which people can work as a group. Like that's why, as you and Adam Patrick talked about, and I talked about as well, like the idea of a one world government can't exist because there's too many internal fragments. There's too many people going off in their own directions. Like we are a group-oriented social species, but at the same time, it only goes so far. Like we're not like, okay, I'm going to work with every single person on the planet. Okay, I'm going to agree with every single person on the planet. It's impossible. And then because part of what gets into it here is, like we say, people favor their family, people favor their kin, and then you can also sort of channel the elephant in the brain stuff of people are still self-interested, so that's going to cause the groups to split and things like that. And that's where the religious ritual and the reinforcement comes in. The idea that you have to hold the group together, but at the same time, there's nothing really powerful enough to hold the world together because there's too many competing interests. There's too many people who prefer themselves. Too many people prefer their own family and friends. So it's just it can't work. It can, like, there's an optimal range at which this can work, I guess I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a key thing. The optimal range of what can work, because everything
Yeah.
is governed by something. All
Yeah.
structures that we create in general are governed by something. Some are
Yeah.
kind of self-governing, where you can set stuff and has some general perpetual motion, like those little things that those balls that you put, but that thing is governed still by gravity and mass and things like that. So that still has some governing, but you don't have to directly control it. Now, when it comes to like a global government, and I'm actually a globalist. I'm somebody who thinks it's a global country, global world, and you can't really go back to that. The problem is we're trying to use structures of governance that were created to govern principalities and small states to work on a global level, and that's not going to work because those things don't work. And I think that's a similar thing with most of the beliefs in gods that we have. The major ones came from small villages in the Middle East in the Bronze Age. Those structures cannot contain the reality that we live in, and where they can't govern our awareness of the spiritual, of the transcendent anymore. Yet we're trying to fit that in, just how we're trying to fit in these specialized state governments that were set. They're state governments, called the state for a reason, but the world, the globe is not a state. So you can't have a state government system for whatever purpose and efficacy it had for states apply for that level. So I think that is part of it. That could be part of, I think, why there is this general tension in a lot of people is in the past you had something that was sufficient enough to account for those known unknowns within that group of 100 people. There was enough people around you who seemed to be benefiting from the same belief system and harmed by the same belief system. So having the same answers to those known unknowns that do affect your life. Yet now we live in the situation where states that are constantly there controlling things. In the past we had the sense where we could have enough of a belief in some other being that controls most of the things that we deal with, and understand that that being could be benign or it could have our best interest in mind. Yet now most of us are aware that it's the state, it's human beings that really are controlling all these things. And we're not able to cheat ourselves that those are such different humans than we are. So we're not able to cheat ourselves that these beings actually have higher abilities to be able to do things and know answers that we don't have. So I think there's this subconscious kind of background radiation of just constant threat and predation that the people who are controlling you really don't give a damn about you. And even if they did give a damn about you, there's so many things out there that they're unable to control that they claim they can control. So that could be part of that constant tension that seems to be just like below the surface for a lot of people that didn't exist in the past. Because I have trust in the chief. I have trust in Inanna, our local god, because I have a personal relationship with my chief, personal relationship with Inanna, and I know their capabilities and they know this area. I think that could be something that I think we can consider with, because people are on edge. But I'm like, what are you on edge about? There's something we must be on edge about.
Well, it's interesting too because I think I brought this up in the conversation with Adam as well. Like people keep complaining about, oh, the country's divided. And listen, it's like if you look at all these civilizations, like even great ones throughout history, there's always been divisions. I mean, people talk about ancient Greece. Greece was not a unified thing. You had all these city states that fought each other, had different systems of government. Some conquered each other, then they got liberated, then those ones conquered other ones, etc. If you look at ancient Rome, obviously they had all these different gods, but there were also all these various cults. They said there was like a Roman version of Scientology, kind of. There were debates among the elites about, is the Earth flat? Is the Earth the center of the you say universe, I mean solar system. Does the Earth rotate or does it sit still? There were all those debates, and then so somebody said like traditional Roman values. It's like, what does that even mean? I mean, you had all these people that believed all these different things. Yeah, it's like, and then you can talk about the church's monopoly on things, but I mean, even then I was revisiting the Cave and the Light, that book about Aristotle and Plato, and they talked about how the Crusades, even though they were a disaster in terms of lives and they didn't succeed at what they wanted to do, they really bridged the culture kind of to the East, because people in the West are like, wait a minute, these people have silk robes, they have these nice spices, they have all these things, we want some of those things. So certain European vassals started allowing Jewish and Muslim scholars to sort of sneak into their places. Like Aquinas' father actually did that, even though technically he wasn't supposed to. But then it's like, you had the church saying, okay, officially we're banning Aristotle, but no one really listened. So there were these divisions. And then, of course, Luther, the Reformation, the church split into a million different factions, not literally a million, but you get what I mean, all these different churches and things. So and then, of course, in this country, you can talk about hostility to different immigrant groups, and they become assimilated. New groups, there's hostility to them. So it's like there's never been this one unified like narrative. I people who say like, oh, we were unified, now we're divided. It's like we've never really been unified. Which, however you look at it, it's just you're more aware of the divisions because you're living through them, and they show up in a different way. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's about the nature of history. In history, you
yeah,
only hear about the notable things. What was
yeah,
notable? You hear about the big wars, the big schisms, when there was like a famine for a long time, or when some people came in and there was a massive protest. You hear about that. That's how it is. Like historically, in the past, you'd hear about the summer of protests, of riots, but you wouldn't hear about just like the individual ones that spark up for a few days because some person got shot somewhere. But now you're on Twitter, and every other day there's something trending where you're seeing all this activity of hundreds of people. And as I mentioned before, our capacity of actually keeping people in mind is 100 to 150 people. So if every day we see on social media thousands of people arguing about different topics that come up, it might seem like that's 10 times more than the amount of people were genetically used to being able to actually hold in our brain. So it seems like there's 10 times more people. But in history, we don't hear about the equivalent when it was just these people in this neighborhood that had some issue for a few weeks. They were just having a small skirmish out there. That wasn't written down in history. But now
yeah,
we're getting every single one. It seems to be like a constant thing. So it
yeah.
seems the perception seems to be a lot more, but the things they're fighting on are definitely nowhere close to that level. Like somebody fighting for more representation in Harvard, like getting the number of black people in Harvard, white people like all around the country. That's a whole different battle, but people are trying to act like those are the same things when it's clearly not the same animal at all.
No, no. All right.
Um,
Um, anything else or?
yeah, there was something here. Just again, we're talking that with. I'm trying to think of why some people seem to be on edge. Now, again, I'm saying seem to be on edge because historically, I don't have the time to go back and talk to the average person. But I have some comparison and something I came up talking with Adam as we were pointing out how he pointed out something with the boomers in the United States of America, how they have certain tensions. And he made a good proposition that they might be the part of the ones who were most, they were talking about how, oh, with this pandemic, like the kids have to sacrifice stuff for us. That we have to shut down the schools because you might kill grandma. And that actually worked. And the boomers, they vote at different levels. With historically, the older people in society seem to be much more willing to sacrifice their general safety for the sake of society. Yet that seems to be something different with the boomers. And I was talking about the American dream and the way the perception. So instead of first world problems, it's more like a first world perception thing. So what is part of the reason why people perceive certain things? Because these aren't necessarily first world problems that they're talking about. Like the pandemic, for example, is a global thing. The same bug is here in Kenya as it is in the United States of America. But why do people in the United States of America react to similar numbers, similar death numbers, similar threat in an entirely different way? And that's entirely a perception thing rather than a practical thing. The climate in the world is changing. But why do Americans or first worlders, a specific subset of first worlders, seem to react to it in a different way? Some of the people are like, oh, like we need to worry about this in this future time, but it's like, hey, you think the world's going to end in 10 years, so why are you worrying about what's going to happen in 30 years? But besides that point, that perception, and I was thinking with that, you look at the children, you look at the children, that song is stuck in my head now.
Oh boy.
But selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. You're talking about OxyContin. You're talking about these things with the dopamine things. A lot of people abuse these drugs in college. A lot of kids have been to college. A lot of millennials and Gen Z and people like that went to college, have been using these drugs. A lot of people are antidepressants and all these things. It's been found to be certain parts of it are actually in the water. So people have different sensitivities to things. Some people might have a lick of just a bit of shellfish and swell up. Some people might need to eat like an entire shrimp platter and then they'll swell up. So just having minute aspects of water, of these drugs, these antidepressant drugs in the water, and people drink water a lot daily, that could accumulate to different people's sensitivities. And then an additional thing, a lot of people go to work, there's a lot less stay-at-home mothers anymore. It's advised that you're supposed to have 6 months to begin with of just breastfeeding with newborns. Most Americans don't do that anymore. I think in my estimation, they'll go off of formula, or the mom will be back to work and things like this. So these things could just be, we could be kind of different animals when it comes to our brain chemistry and just messing up some of these things and making certain people just be more prone to just freaking out about certain things when these systems that were set in, you're supposed to have these endorphins that's rush to actually do something, then it has an outlet because it seems to be, you get that feeling and you see a confirmation in reality of why that feeling was there, but now people get those feelings and there's no confirmation, so people feel they might have missed something, and it just kind of just gets that system off of whack. I'm trying to understand kind of where
Well,
that kind of falls in.
I mentioned it with Adam, and I think I've mentioned it in different shows we've done about how all the social justice stuff has a reverse cognitive behavioral therapy effect. And I think the challenge with this is that people are looking for meaning in life, so they see themselves as like heroes fighting for oppressed people. And also it's a system that explains the world. Again, like the religion we're talking about, it gives you explanations. This is why this exists. This is why this is a problem. So people are drawn to that for that reason. But unfortunately, at the same time, as I've mentioned several times, I mean, it has the reverse cognitive behavioral therapy effect. It teaches people to catastrophize. It teaches people to think in black and white. It teaches people to assume the worst about general groups of people, on and on. And the fact that these ideologies enshrine all these habits as virtues, it just creates a lot of dysfunction. It's a downward spiral. And that's why I think a lot of people who buy into this stuff are constantly posting about how depressed they are, how it's the worst, oh, we live in such bad times, all this. And they don't realize that these are self-inflicted wounds because they're drawn into it because it gives them answers to how the world operates and maybe gives them a purpose, but they don't see how destructive it is simultaneously.
Yeah, for sure. I think I agree. In general, these are not happy people.
No.
And I would not be surprised to see, like, as we see a lot of these situations where there's a mass shooter, there's somebody who's been found to be violent, somebody's in an instant altercation with a policeman where they seem to be acting a fool, then they get shot, they get harmed, and things like that. Often you find these people are often on SSRIs, and different people have different proclivities and tendencies. Some people go more to violence, and I think with some social justice warriors, whether it be going back to the past with them when the more religious right had more of a stronger sway in society, or current with the progressive left and things like that, some of them are committing some forms of, they even come out and say, we're out here to destroy these aspects of society. We have to tear down society. They're committing societal violence. There is a form of violent activity, destructive activity they're going in. I would not be surprised to find that that there's a higher propensity, a higher percentage compared to the general public of the people that are very active out there in their activism that are also on SSRIs. I would not be surprised to find that instead of direct violence, they're more like proxy violence and more like societal violence, mental violence in that kind of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it many times that it's not super empirical, it's just kind of my observation. But every person I met like this either has issues with anger, anxiety, depression, some combination. Like I've never met one of these people who's like sincerely a happy, like loves life kind of person. Like I have, like if there are, I'm willing to see them. But given the stuff that Jonathan Haidt, given the stuff that Haidt and Luke Yanoff talked about with reverse CBT, it makes sense why they'd be like this. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So let's see. All right. So moving on. The role of dreams in ritual and trance. It's highly conceivable that our ancestors dreamed of gods. Today, we know that dreams are a product of our brains and provide insight into our emotional lives. Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. But even today, the best therapists don't know how or why we dream. However, this didn't stop our ancestors from seeing dreams as uniquely powerful. Beginning in the 5th century BC, the Greeks built temples to Asclepius, the god of healing. Citizens would go to the temples to sleep and induce dreams through ritual, fasting, and prayer. They'd use the information in dreams for healing, and they believed that the gods revealed themselves in dreams. The early Egyptians also saw dreams as a key source of divine information. If you were to go back even further, it would make sense that our distant ancestors would see dreams about our ancestors or spirits as insight into the world. Combine the lack of understanding about the natural world with decoupled cognition, which we discussed in a previous section, which allows us to accept unseen beings. This could very well explain the beginning of gods. We don't have solid proof of this, of course. Gods may have been the personifications of things like fire. This could explain why candles are still common in religious rituals today. Our ancestors harnessing fire for the first time must have seemed miraculous. Same with the perception of volcanoes, the sun, the moon, and other natural wonders. Aaron Ra frequently brings up how Yahweh is referred to as the volcano in the Old Testament. I think that's kind of interesting, because the idea that, okay, this mountain billows, molten rock. They probably didn't know what it was. Smoke, all this. It's like, what's causing this? The belief was, of course, it was some sort of divine occurrence. Likely the beginnings of gods came from a desire to communicate with them, not just during sleep. If they wanted to communicate with them through means other than sleep, they needed to create their own quote-unquote royal road. So another way to do this, aside from dreaming, was through trance, such as drumming and singing for hours or days on end. So it's basically the concept of the runner high, but taken to the extreme. Certain Native American tribes have a practice of isolating themselves and engaging in sensory deprivation, which can make one feel like they're sensing the presence of another. Fasting can distort perceptions and even cause hallucinations. This could be why religions engage in fasting rituals. Perhaps unconsciously through these rituals, our ancestors learned to boost neurotransmitters and create the biotechnology of group cohesion. Hyper agency detection device, which we discussed earlier, also gets turbocharged by neurochemicals during rituals, which likely led to our ancestors believing not only in invisible beings, but entities with human-like attributes. Early rituals centered on things that we know now can alter brain chemistry. Music, song, intense rhythmic activity, and strong emotion, possibly combined with sleep deprivation and or fasting. Many rituals were designed to be exhaustive, with people singing and dancing all night or longer. This brought brain chemical activity to its peak. Our ancestors found that dancing, and likely the use of certain substances, induced trance and provided what seemed like access to unseen beings. It also provided validation for the existence of another world and unseen spirits within it. Consider the word enthusiasm derives from the Greek word enthusiasmos, which means possessed or inspired by God. Another aspect of rituals is that they focus on the community, not the individual, and the rituals could convey morals or lessons important to the group's survival. The rituals accomplished what individuals could not. They could evoke a sense of unseen dangers, especially from deceased ancestors or for those who stepped out of line. These rituals generally marked rites of passage: birth, puberty, marriage, and death. Remnants of this survives today, and this sort of what I touched on earlier about like hazing with fraternities or even a mosh pit at a concert. Those three surviving tribes listed earlier used rituals to induct men into the secrets of the tribe. Initiation rituals can be painful and terrifying, which releases the previously mentioned neurochemicals and also strengthen the bonds of the tribe. They also energize men for war, make them loyal, and instill courage and attachment to the conventions of the tribe. The part about pain, by the way, is interesting. I remember learning a few years ago, they've said that's why people actually cut themselves, because it releases those certain brain chemicals. I'm trying to think if it's endorphins or one of them that makes people feel better. So they know perhaps at some level, maybe subconsciously, that the cutting actually releases that. And in the past, it's because like I mentioned earlier, if your ancestors dealt with pain, they needed something to sort of center themselves so they could get out of that situation. Like if you're bitten by an animal and you need to escape, you need something to sort of center you so you can at least get away for long enough, then you can bandage yourself up or whatever. Even today, Australian Aborigines call the time before history, quote unquote, dream time. They keep their rituals safe from outsiders, thus preserving the integrity of the group. The rituals tend to be long and physically exhaustive and usually consist of things like singing, chanting, contemplating sacred objects, and introducing the myths and objects to newcomers. Thoughts and comments? Oh.
Yeah, this is a cool section to me. I'm very fascinated with dreams, and that's one of the fields that I wish we could put more research and investment and time into, but there hasn't been any, no one has shown any direct financial profits to it. And of course, we know with a lot of research and in science and information is state ran and gets a lot of it gets a lot of what's it called? Gets a lot of funding from the state, and the state is about to control and things like this. And I think with dreams, that focuses more on like self-knowledge and self-awareness and exploring things outside of the human realm and the material realm. So there's very little interest for politicians to want to encourage people to look more for answers in their dreams and exposing the external. So religious people don't want you to think other forms of understanding, in my from my estimation. So, but just for the people who are listening, I appreciate you listening, and I think if you listen to this content, there's a good chance I value what you think, even if you disagree with stuff. So let me know if there's books or locations or research that you've seen on dreams that you find to be entertaining or useful, that's been useful to you. Let me know in the comment section or send me an email. Contact me at carbon33.com. Might leave an email here because to me that's something that has affected my life a lot. Most of my creative projects when it comes to the arts and things like that are things that I've actually dreamt of. Remember dreaming of the characters and interacting with them. Then it took me some time to realize that, oh, this was actually my mind trying to make sense of the things that are going on in my life. Some of the times when I would have the most stress and most problems in my life, I would dream the most actively and things like this. And I read Prometheus Rising and I attempted like the lucid dreaming because I found myself being able to do that, and I could do that more sometimes. I find truly when I'm trying to think hard about something, yes, you can focus in on a lot. There's ways to do it where you focus on things a lot before you go to sleep or something, and or you read the things over, and then you chances you'll dream about it. But just in general, when I'm in tough times, I find myself dreaming about certain things, and it's been very helpful to me. So I don't know with you, Stephen, how
Well,
much?
I mean, the stuff that's been written about dreams, as far as I know, like Freud himself wrote, what was it, Anatomy of Dreams, Interpretation of Dreams, something. But like, as far as we know, it's completely theoretical. Like, it's interesting stuff to think about, but it's not really testable. Someone brought up too how apparently in ancient Rome, one of the thinkers actually studied dreams. It was kind of interesting. What I guess he did was he basically interviewed people and asked, "What dreams did you have?" And he wrote them down, and then he tried to look for links between their experiences and the dreams. Like, oh, this person dreamt about this and got a job down the line. You know, it's not ultra scientific, but it was interesting how like someone was actually trying to study that way back when. And then they've talked about like stuff you eat and how that affects, you know, especially close to bed. And so someone has, my brother told me he's heard that if you eat dairy close to when you sleep, I guess that's more likely to have bad dreams. And there was one cartoon or something where a character said, "Oh, no more cheese before bed for me." So I wonder if there's something to things like that. But again, some of that stuff, like I'm not sure how proven it is. It's more theoretical at this point. You know, it'll be cool if they can figure this stuff out more and more. But as far as we know, I mean, you know, it's just theory. Yeah.
There could be a part in it where, like, our body is just cells. It's
Yeah.
different cells and organisms and organs that are together as one being and one creature. Like when your heart and brain dies, technically the rest of your body is like still alive, or it's still doing the same things that your body does alive. Like if you lose an arm, the arm eventually dies, but the rest of your body is still alive. So we're different. We're a conglomeration of different living beings. There could be an aspect when it comes to dreams where your brain is where you're more kind of aware to that sub level. Like the reason you still breathe, the reason you still like blink and things like that without thinking about it, there's parts of your body communicating that you got to keep breathing. Heart, you got to keep beating. There's a communication process going in there that actually does these things. So maybe there could be a thing where you're tapping down to that lower level. So if you're having certain foods, for example, milk, which yes, most humans now have adjusted to it, but that's something that came much later in the human animal's creation. In fact, like this, I have really cut down on milk. Like I'll have occasional ice cream or something like that, but just drinking straight milk, even like milk tea or like milk coffee, I don't do that anymore. There was a time when I was just changing my diet around to get into the freezing again. Here I was talking about certain things I did, certain information and research I did when I was looking into dieting and becoming healthier, and I was talking about specifically milk, and we're getting back into that now. Before, humans don't even drink milk as much as they're supposed to, as most animals do during the childhood, during the infancy point, and then let alone just drinking milk for longer. We drink cow milk normally, or like camel milk, or like goat milk, depending on where on what culture you're in. But I'm like, cow milk is for baby cows. Like you're not supposed to be drinking that kind of stuff. And the same thing that was mentioned, like with the milk, as you were talking about, there's certain chemicals that are being sent to the baby that are supposed to attach them or do trigger certain things by drinking the milk. And then with the cows, most of the cows that we drink from, they're also containing those chemicals. It's sure not all chemicals cross over from bovines to mammals, or not bovines are mammals, from bovines to Homo sapiens or whatever. I think I don't know what level they are and that kind of thing. But there's some effect in there. The hormones we're giving them. So we're drinking milk that's supposed to activate certain things in another growing mammal. And when you have that in your body, maybe we're not completely used to just breaking down straight dairy products in general. So there is an issue with that. So maybe if your body is at that point where it's not ingesting something that it's used to doing, maybe you're getting some negative communications and your body's like, oh, we're struggling. Like, why are we doing this? Like, don't put this in our body right now. Whereas I think it's something that another thing I suggest people do is attempt fasting. I right now doing like weekend fasts. I've done 5-day fasts as the longest ones I've done. And I do fasting sporadically and occasionally, and I find it's a very positive thing in my life. And when you fast and you start taking in food, you become more cognizant of, like, after a really long fast. I remember the first 5-day fast I did was kind of involuntary. I just didn't have access to food at the time I was in college. And then eventually I got like a tangerine. And I remember eating the tangerine and just feeling like it go into your body. I could feel it like hit the stomach. I could kind of feel like the energy was kind of radiating into my body and things like this. And I think that might be a certain awareness that when you get to those lower levels of consciousness, you might be tapping into the cellular consciousness level of your body. So if your body is ingesting something that is not completely comfortable with, it's going to kind of affect the different imbalances. And when people just eat cleaner versus people eating dirty, when they're talking about lifting heavy weights, like there's different chemical things that I think go in there that kind of make sense of why you might be dreaming about these kind of things. And maybe there's even a lower knowledge or awareness. Your brain cells might be able to calculate that if you don't get this job, you're going to be in trouble. You're not going to be able to feed the rest of your cells. So maybe when you're sleeping, you're dreaming more about that job because you have somehow attached that job with resource provision to be able to support the rest of your cells. So your whole body will just be thinking more and more about how to obtain that job. And then you find yourself doing the things that lead to you getting that job. And then post factor rationalization, you say it's because of the dream. So I don't know. That's what I'm saying, like this research. Please tell me where this research has been done. And I think it would be a fantastic thing to kind of find out about. It's an untapped treasure trove that we have. Yeah.
So to the point with cows, so bovine is actually the subfamily, then genus would be like cows, and then specific species would be like Guernsey or yeah. So that I was trying to think about that, and then like because like bovine includes like buffalo, bison, all that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So bovine, when it comes to humans, what level are the humans on? Is that apes?
Because I'm trying to remember. It's like family, genus, species. So I mean, I think what is it? It's
the
kingdom. Kingdom is animals. Phylum. It's King Philip eats fried green salami. So it's kingdom, phylum, family. Family, genus, species. Yeah. So family, like I know families would include like bovine, or I guess like I'm trying to think now, like, so like I guess like animal kingdom, but then like it would fish in general be like phylum, and then like genus or certain subsets of fish, and then species would be like, a domestic goldfish or whatever. I don't know. I'd have to look that up.
I'm just typing on DuckDuckGo. Bovine is to cow as what is to human. But I guess it could also just go on.
Primates, maybe. Primates.
Huh? Yeah,
primates.
Might be on the primates level. Then because primates are there. Then like there's apes and monkeys, which are different, and then humans are part of apes, just like gorillas are. So yeah, I think that's 2 down from.
Yeah.
And you said it's bovine, and then cattle, and then the different kinds of cows.
Yeah. So so it'd be like you say, it's like primates,
I'll check
different monkeys and gorillas, and then like individual like macaque monkeys, chimpanzees, etc. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on. Religious ritual solves ritual as survival mechanism. Religious rituals solve several problems at once. They could evoke punishment for wrongdoers, resolve conflict, identify free riders, settle feuds, wipe the slate clean, and create an area in which hard-to-fake, costly, honest signals could be received and scrutinized. Rituals also may have helped drive away predators. These earlier religions had no priests or ecclesiastical hierarchy. There were likely alpha males or elders, which led to quasi-leadership positions, which led to shamanism, but clergy didn't develop until much later. Nicholas Wade wrote in his book, The Faith Instinct, about how rituals generate a sense of togetherness and awe and a desire to put the group's interest above the personal. We lose our sense of self and become bonded with those whom we sing and dance with throughout a long night. Archaeological and anthropological evidence supports that these rituals got transferred whenever groups moved. Settled societies emerged 15,000 years ago, and 10,000 years ago, agriculture began. As humanity changed, religion adapted. Religion took on themes in relation to the changes in seasons. Paganism and pantheism created Oestra, the spring festival. Of course, it's where Easter comes from. And Judaism, Sukkot marks the end of the food harvest. Passover is the beginning of the barley festival. Shavuot, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, marks the end of the wheat harvest. Christianity incorporated these rituals into Easter and other holidays. With the emergence of literacy about 5,000 years ago, we saw the emergence of priestly castes allied with political power. So we see how rituals bind groups together and settled civilizations emerge. This created social stratification. In some religions, dancing was ultimately eliminated, but rhythmic movement has been maintained. Think of coordinated prayer among Muslim men, the alternating of kneeling, standing, and sitting during a Catholic mass, or even the role of things like the Gregorian chant used in Latin rituals as late as the 1960s. Look at the gospel music in African American churches with roots in African dance and ritual. In other religions, we see the power of rituals because they are feared. Some Southern Baptists will never make love standing up so that God does not think they are dancing. I didn't know that until this book. Pews were also not originally in churches for seating. That was an afterthought. They were put in the 16th century to prevent dancing. Music's origins are still debated. Is it a byproduct of other mechanisms, hard vowels and consonants put to the rhythm of a beating heart, or is music a sort of standalone adaptation? Darwin thought that music was one of the best examples of his idea of sexual selection. I conclude that musical notes and rhythm were first acquired by the male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex. The musical tones became firmly associated with some of the strongest passions an animal is capable of feeling, end quote. And consider to this day that people still use dancing as a way to attract mates. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, that end thing, both of the whole like reproduction thing, that's weird. It's like they think a being that knows everything is like omniscient, that knows what you think, would somehow be able to see you having sex and think and like and think you're dancing. Like, would you be able to like be in your brain? But this is not rational stuff. This is not. It's not. It's it's inherently irrational. It's faith. It's not with evidence. So it's kind of interesting. But one thing we mentioned before in other conversations, a key thing with understanding human activity is that we are machines made to propagate genes. So reproduction is a key part of the way we do things. And I'm also currently re-listening to The Moral Animal by Robert Wright, and he's talking about different things about how we evolved morality and things like that, and how as society became more complicated, in some cases convoluted, there's certain things that become further and further from direct showing of this makes me fitter to reproduce. So as reproductive selective pressures aren't as pressing, you're part of a society where you feel who you as an identity are, who you as a person are, is accounted in the society. So if other people in the society have children, you don't necessarily feel as much of an urge that you need to have children to carry something on. You feel some connection, whether it's genetic or whatever, to something else. So that kind of has been reduced, where you have a lot of behaviors that seem to be very detached or not necessarily connected to actual reproductive fitness. And I think there's certain other behaviors that we don't really understand that somebody might be doing this actually just to have improved reproductive fitness. They might just be talking about, oh yeah, we need separate schools for these people and these people, because they understand if my kids are in this separate location, they might actually do better off if they're not actually together with these kids. It might be subconscious, and then now they get to the point where they're like, okay, let's accept this part in it because they're not going to come and attack me and my job, and I'm still going to go along. And I just listened to this podcast with Victor David Hansen podcast, and he was talking about how there's been showing to be, he was saying ostensibly there was some eliterati type of people who were accepting, they're saying, okay, I make all this money, but I put in all this time and my kids are going to get into, for example, Princeton or Harvard or these schools. They deserve that. But I'm just going to signal to this. I'm going to go along with these rituals. This seems to be the accepted religion. I might not necessarily believe it, but yes, get that equality. Get that 15% of black people into the school. I have no problem with that. My kids are still going to get in because we're legacy and things like this, right? And then it gets to the point where Princeton's like, okay, we're going to have only 50% of the people admitted are going to be white. And then all of a sudden they start missing out. They're like, wait, no, what's going on here? Because as long as it wasn't necessarily affecting their kids, and you see it as well. Look at the things people signal, societal-wise, ritual-wise, preach-wise, versus do they take their kids to those schools? Do they live in those communities, or do they have private schools? When it comes down to their family, how are they? Think about who they say they are friends with. When it comes down to marrying people, who are they marrying with? Who are they associating with? And I think that's where you see those still have those kind of reproductive things that are still a lot stronger in that, and you see that kind of force being pushed there. That's kind of interesting. But yeah.
Well, the dancing thing is something I thought about. Like, I was never really into clubs. Like, I had a few friends who were, but like, you think about that, like, people want to be attractive to the other sexes. Obviously, women will wear skimpy outfits, makeup and other things. And of course, there it's pretty much dependent on looks because music's blasting. You can't have much of a conversation. But, you go there to pick up partners essentially, or, however you want to put it. And there was that line from, what was that movie? There was something with Will Smith where he talked about how women equate dancing with sex, and there was this heavy guy, and then he like sort of like spins his like waist around, and they're just like, no, and it's like, but I do wonder, like, is there something to that? Like, it shows physical fitness, coordination, like, the person could be strong in a fight potentially. The person is willing to put themselves out in public, and they could potentially embarrass themselves, but they're willing. Like, I'm wondering if it sort of factors into all these different things.
Yeah, there's various things in there because why do certain animals have those dancing displays before they part of their courting process? There's many things that do go into it. It's part of it showing the physical ability and fitness, the status. Do people stop and watch? Do people like it's different kind of things that the bravery and and again it's societal. It depends, but different societies have it. So like also that Dave Chappelle skit, it's not like white people can't dance. It's like, what do they dance to? It was still a common thing for the most wealthy people to go to like balls and galas and do the waltzes and those things. They still have their own situation of having that kind of display.
Yeah, was it George Washington was known for ballroom dancing or something, or one of those? Like, apparently he was known at being very good at that. So,
okay. Right. So I looked up the thing we're talking about with the cows. Yeah. And it's okay. So kingdom, both of us share Animalia. Phylum, we both share Chordata, and I think Chordata is the spine and has something to do with that.
Okay.
And then class is Mammalia, which of course the mammals.
Class, that was what I forgot. Yeah.
Things like that. Order is where we first change. Order, the cows are Artidoctria, and I think that might have something to do with like hoofed animals, maybe. And then order for us is of course primates. Then family is Bovidae, and then our infraorder is Semiformes, which they don't have a semi-order for cattle, but our family is Hominidae, and then of course we're already at it. So that's the family is Bovidae, and then subfamily is Bovinae. Then our subfamily is Hominae, and then tribe for us is Hominini, and they don't have a tribe, but they have the species of B. taurus, and then we have our genus of Homo. Their genus is Bos, and then their species is B. taurus, Bos taurus, and then our genus is Homo, and of course our species is Homo sapiens. So
sure. Okay.
We split at class.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Next section, precaution. Think of a Catholic athlete making the sign of a cross, or LeBron James putting talcum powder on his hands, clapping them, and throwing the remainder to his audience. Both rituals are ways of boosting reassurance and allaying fear. Freud thought that religion was society's obsessive-compulsive disorder, and that obsessive-compulsive disorder was an individual's private religion. That's an interesting way to look at it. He saw the link, but didn't fully understand it. We know now that the brain has precautionary vigilance systems that can be triggered to take repetitive or stereotyped action to allay anxiety. These same mechanisms are used in religious rituals to deal with anxiety generated by uncertainty or risk, both inherent in life, but especially common in the harsh, dangerous world of our ancestors. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, here again, it's going with part of why you might have certain tensions is you see certain high achieving people, high resource provision people, or high status people have specific rituals, especially when it comes to athletes. That's one of the fields where they really have certain things. They have to have certain things in certain ways. Not even just athletes, performers, musicians. I think people of high status seem to have certain rituals that they go into, especially public figures, A musician will have to make sure there's certain things on their rider. I think it's the rider when they're touring and every green room there has to be, oh, I want M&Ms, where you got to pick out all the green ones. For all these things that in their mind is part of the process they need to go through to achieve that. And for them, they can do all these quirky type of odd things because they have the resource provision and status to back up that somehow these are the things that have happened when I did these things. But your average person, I think part of the reason we have this loss in rituals and confusion and tension is that there's all these different rituals being taught, and there's very little reinforcement that the rituals you actually engage in have actually given you certain achievements. People don't have a lot of self-confidence and self-knowledge, and on top of that, we are aware of the millions of people. Whereas in the past, of those 100 people that you're around, 100, 150 people, let's say it's 100 people, 80 of the people would be kind of just average people. 10 of the people will be a lot worse than you are. Then 10 of the people would be like those people in those higher class, and you were also very aware of why they had those parts. But now you're in a situation where you have your rituals, you have your things, and then there's somebody, some new little kid somewhere who seems to be making millions and have all these fans, and you go and you look at them on their Twitter or their Facebook or their social media, and you're like, this person's an idiot. Why do they have these things? Like, I have my rituals, I have my effort, so you kind of get that loss where you don't really have that much, reinforcement from having your rituals, and you don't get that pleasure and things. So I think that anxiety could be there. Whereas in the past, you all had the same rituals. So all the people in your group, all the people above, all the people below you were still engaging in the same rituals. So you had some kind of background feeling that as long as I did these things, I could maintain this middle and I could get to that top. Or if I don't do them, I will be at this bottom. So I think that kind of reinforced that structure more. And again, with the people who are of faith, I definitely do accept that religion, theology, belief in God has been a core part of people's belief systems for, I don't want to say millennia actually, for societies, but doesn't necessarily, millennia is centuries, right?
No, millennium, that's 1,000 years. So you figure.
Yeah. So even millennium,
Yeah.
yeah. So millennia, for millennia, it's been part of it. But I do think we can get to a point where it's reducing. We don't have to bring that back necessarily in order to still maintain and achieve and supersede the positive things that belief in God was giving to the people at that level in humanity's evolution as a entity. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And yeah, it was interesting what you just said about the whole, sort of the bell curve thing about people at the top, people at the bottom, in the middle. And that's sort of the challenge about people breaking off and going in their own directions, because historically, if you did that, you either got killed, exiled, or jailed. And of course, that meant your genes died off. That's why so many people go with the flow and still do. But at the same time, the people who were able to do it successfully, they end up in charge of the new group. And then it's like, then they become a higher status than something else. It's a question of how many people succeeded at doing that and what are the risks people are willing to take to try and get to that level. And a lot of people are not willing to take that risks of what they're up against.
Yeah, and actually, as you mentioned that with the bell curve, I think I might be focusing too much, as humans normally do, on the people who are better off.
Yeah.
But what might be actually even more disturbing is instead of being able to see, like in the past, you were only able to see like 80 people who are like you, and now with the more people, now we see 1,000 people who are much better off than us, and we can hope to be like them. But what's even more troubling is in the past you could only see 10 people who were like you, and majority of the people who are like you were generally okay or better. But now there's also 1,000 people who seem to be doing the same things that you're doing and are in a horrible place. So your mind is also able to be like, holy shit, I could just be there. So I think
that's also why social media has contributed to depression and things, because there's people who go on and they see people on vacations, traveling, happy, all that, and they just look at that and they think, wow, my life sucks by comparison. But then it's like, you have to remember that that's a person's highlight reel. Like, you're not experiencing when they lose somebody or what they're going through and all that. And like, I have a friend who recently she lost a cousin, and I guess her father's health isn't good, and she's posting pictures of herself partying and everything, and she's kind of like, look, I'm not in a good place right now. I know I posted stuff on social media, but I'm dealing with a lot of pain. And it's like, you have to bear that stuff in mind, because it's easy to look at the person's highlight reel and be like, wow, this person has such a great life, why isn't mine like that? But you're not seeing the whole picture. You're just focused on
Yeah.
highlights. Like conceivably you could post like pictures of yourself at weddings, yourself at parties, yourself at all this, and people could look at your life and think, wow, this person's so lucky, I wish I was like that. But they don't know the problems that you go through too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a key thing.
yeah,
Just also project your life or your own life on people. Just
yeah,
if you're in a situation where you're struggling with something, and then you look on social media or other people and you say, or you just meet people in your day-to-day life and you think, oh, everybody has, or most people have such a better life than I do. Ask yourself, how much of your actual issues do you project, do you publish on social media? If you just meet somebody in a grocery store and you're really going through some tough things and they say hi or they wave or they walk by you, do you break down and cry, or do you just wave and smile and like engage in small talk? Chances are you are someone who's just more sociable and you just put on the social aspect. It's about being social. Like social media is intend to be social, but some people take
yeah,
it too personal. And that aspect, if you're somebody that doesn't project your personal actual issue in public in that sense, don't assume that because everybody else is projecting a sort of comfortable and happy and level-minded situation, they're not also going through some really tough things in their mind. They might just be like you, putting on a brave face. So don't just assume that. And especially again, I just want to ask, like, your friends, if you know these people, try to find people around you, have at least one or two people, two to three, the more the better around you that you can actually open up with and ask questions about. And if there's people in your life that you care about, that you are not sure about certain things, even if you're sure, just ask, how are you doing? Like, how are you really doing? Like, is there something
yeah.
else that's in there? It's that really means a lot to it can mean the world. It can save lives
Yeah,
to be somebody who just asks that question to somebody when they're in a tough time. So yeah.
definitely. All right. Next section, synchrony and union. Religious rituals use our mirror neurons, which will be discussed more in the next chapter. The original purpose of these was most likely to help an organism learn and make new movements. Religious rituals use these. It's easier to slip into dancing when the people around you are, and the mirror neurons make it easier to do it in coordinated synchrony. Research at Stanford Business School has shown that merely engaging in a synchronous activity, even without heavy muscle coordination, will enhance cooperation and feelings that accompany it. This is the difference in your feeling of a group when you walk in lockstep with them. When heavy muscle activity comes into the mix, it rises to another level. If the synchronous movement involves vigorous muscle activity, pain thresholds actually rise. An experiment at Oxford compared rowers working together versus alone on rowing machines. It was shown that individuals who worked together had a higher pain threshold than those who rowed alone. Endorphins rise with group activity and enhance social bonds. So think of something like Woodstock or even a pep rally at a school, which unites a school to oppose a rival. Thoughts or comments?
One of the cool things in the book that I'm reading, we listening to the Moral Animal, was talking about part of this is the way selection, the way genetic selection, natural selection works. It's not necessarily like a completely active thing. It's not random. It's just if there's a certain set of genes that happens to make you more personable to hunt in groups, it's you're going to catch more prey, and then you'll be just stronger and fitter in order to be more attractive to a mate or either provide them the things. And then chances are those genes will be passed on. Like the gene might randomly or just out of a bunch of different selections, it might be a mutation that occurs. But once it occurs, if it gives an edge, if eventually it will get to a certain point where it's at an equilibrium where that thing is just like part of what that organism is, because it's just such a more advantage than not being that. But there'll still be a smaller amount of things that are not that, in order to just have, it's just the way nature kind of has some different, a different evening of back and forth. But anyway, so with that, this could be a simple thing. Part of this is just in the past when people were still hunting, if you just hunt one small equivalent rabbit or the creatures that were back then, that's something that can be caught by one person. But in order to catch an ox or a mammoth or something like that, you had to have a group of people. And then once you did that, you were able to catch that and you're able to store it and you're able to not be out there on a daily basis hunting and being in threat of actually being predated on or breaking a bone and things like that. Then when you had those situations, you could sit and think and plan and create better tools, create better enclosures and homes and shelters and things like that, start developing society. So society in general is a social construct of a Homo sapiens that became genetically increasingly more predisposed to being social. So it completely makes sense that that's something that we still have in our genes. And for me, one of the things with the social things, like I am I am the most I'm the most social antisocial person you'll know. Like I'm someone who can just completely, like, with this pandemic came, it didn't really change my lifestyle because I'm just like I'm online. I talk to my friends online, but I don't really go out much, and I feel like need to go to bars and things like that. I'm very self-entertaining and things like that. But one thing I really wish I would be able to do once before I die is being part of like a flash mob dance. This, like, freezing once again. I was talking about a Wonder Girls video. It's like this, yo, like that. It's a really great video. Definitely check it out. Getting back into it. Start breaking out the dance, and then everyone in the mall kind of joins in. It's like it just seems like a super exciting thing to be a part of. If anyone's been a part of it, let me know how it was.
As long as you have video footage of yourself doing it, and
I'll record it. I'll be elated. I'll be super happy. It happened. All kinds of camera angles.
All right. The magic of touch. Primates spend tons of time touching each other. The evidence suggests that touch stimulates oxytocin to initiate social bonding and then endorphins to strengthen it. If you show a woman a threat scenario when she is not holding someone else's hand, her amygdala, the part of the brain that really controls fear, will light up. If she's holding a stranger's hand, it is eased somewhat. If she's holding her partner's hand, it is eased even more. The degree to which a partner's hand calms fear is directly proportional to how the woman rates the quality of the relationship. A good partner calms fears better than a less good one. With touch, these prefrontal lobes of our brain that regulate emotion relax and allow us to focus on problem solving. The brain processes a supportive touch as a signal that another person will share the load. Humans are the most cooperative primates, and touch helps build those problem-solving relationships across the brains of our allies. Another study shows that basketball teams that touch the most, they talked about like high fives, slapping each other's butts and things, do the best. Thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I was oddly enough thinking about this a few days ago. It was a friend I had in high school who there was a time, I think it was high school. It wasn't in Sipila. I think it was still middle school actually. I think it was like seventh grade or something. There was a time when I don't know what had started, but we started holding hands a lot. I remember there was like a day where we were watching a basketball game. We just sat there holding hands. Like our hands would get sweaty. We'd like switch hands, moving around. There was times for like months where we'd like find each other between the spaces between classes and just talk and just hold hands, walk around. And just from that experience and that closeness, I didn't really realize at that time, I didn't know about this endorphins and all these things and the touch and whatnot. But the closeness that we had, where even going further on, when I started thinking of relationships, first of all, it was a girl. So for me, that was, and also part of the moving around was like I was just friends with people and didn't really have that whole situation with boys and girls not supposed to be friends. Well, anyway, but having that as one of my first really true selective friendships with somebody of the opposite gender, the emotions and connection that I felt with that compared to what people seem to be basing their early relationships on and the things that we're looking for, I was like, look, for me, holding the hand of somebody you really care about seemed to be much more appealing of a proposition, and the emotions that we felt there from having potential sexual activities or thinking about these other activities with people who are completely strangers. So why were people seeking that kind of connection with people where like holding her hand was not the same as just holding a random person's hand? So I could really tell that massive difference. So that's that is something close to what was mentioned here. Interesting that was brought up, and I just been thinking about that. But yeah.
Well, and they've studied this on other levels too. Like there's certain, like I know Bill Clinton does this where like if you shake a person's hand, but then like you tap their elbow or something, that like psychologically they've said that creates more of a bond between the people. There's things like that. Like if a person will become more attracted to a person if they touch them more when they first date. Like there's studies like this that sort of play into this because there's an actual physical bonding. And, you know, they think of primates, again, it's like pulling bugs out of each other's fur and things like that. Obviously, we don't do that. But there is something about that. Like it fosters that cooperation on some level.
Yeah. I'm going to put up next songs I'm going to listen to when I get out here. I'm going to listen to that Elevation song, church song we did. I'm going to listen to Like This by Wonder Girls, and I'm going to listen to Mel Turner, Let Me Hold Your Hand, The Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and Ray Charles, Baby Let Me Hold Your Hand.
Oh, there you go. Now, nobody has to do this, but this is an experiment that the author proposes. Think of someone you like or love and consider your feelings at the moment when you think of them. Then pinch some skin until it hurts. Now sing a song and move to the rhythm in your voice. If someone is there with you, put your arms around each other's shoulders and sway as the two of you sing. When you finish, after any awkward feeling is cleared, repeat the measurements. See where your pain threshold is when you pinch your skin. Almost everyone who does this reports positive changes afterwards. Now, this is a brief experiment, obviously, but imagine this effect amplified over the course of an entire night with many more people. Think of it at a concert when people hold up their lighters or more recently cell phones and sway them in unison. People report leaving the concert feeling exhilarated and renewed, which shows the power or ritual and touch. I also brought up the example earlier, pep rally. Think of like everyone cheers simultaneously, same basic thing. Rituals also serve as displays of mate worthiness, and this touches on two other aspects of our humanity utilized by religion. Thoughts or comments before I continue?
Yeah, I think it's key here. Like as I was mentioning, these are things that existed before religion, and then these are things about humans utilized by religion. And I just want to mention again, I understand that I am a rather odd person compared to like many other people. I think Stephen himself was also an odd person. Otherwise, we wouldn't really be we wouldn't really be able to get along this well. But for one of the earlier things that it took me a while to realize as the pandemic came and has proven to be true is just how horrific it's been for so many people to not have this outlet, to not be out in public, and how many people didn't have the ability or benefit to have created like it's really a sad situation if somebody is mentally in a space where they're not comfortable to be alone. And that's separate to it. I think we're more individualized. But that whole thing of just being comfortable alone, that's one thing. When people fear being alone, it's not necessarily fearing being alone, but you fear being alone because either you're not truly alone or you're so reliant on other people that you don't necessarily trust to be there for you, or that being at home, like imagine how many people have had these mental breakdowns, the uptick in domestic violence. I know some of that is because people are out of jobs, so there's tension, things like that. But just how many people live in situations where being told you're no longer able to be out in society, you have to be in your main primary living situation, and that gives them tension because that's not a comfortable situation. So that's tough when you're out there with strangers, and then when you go back to where you're supposed to be home or among people you're supposed to know, those people, being around those people, being able to touch and close to those people, it makes you uncomfortable. And then for the other people who being able to touch and be close to people makes them comfortable, you're telling some of these people like simply touching those people that made you simply comfortable could kill those people, and people buy into that. It's the effect that this has had on is going to be felt for generations. It's been a horrific thing that happened. The Chinese need to be held somewhat accountable for their process in this. The World Health Organization, the politicians, the systems that we had. Like as I mentioned, the state system is not a system that's able to do this. We've seen that. Part of my issue with this whole Great Reset to a new normal to build back a better new double plus normal thing. I'm okay with resetting things. Not even necessarily resetting things. I'm okay with building things back better. If something breaks down, don't just rebuild. The Twin Towers fell down, were knocked down in a terrorist attack. Don't just rebuild the Twin Towers and be like, no, take the chance to improve and say, okay, we're still doing something. If you have a breakup with somebody and that relationship falls apart, don't just go back and find somebody exactly like that. Build yourself back up to a better person. Find a stronger person, build a better relationship. That general concept is positive. But my big question with this is if we're doing a reset, if we're building back, if we're trying to do a new normal, why the hell should the people who are responsible for the old crap, the old normal, be the ones in charge of building back this new better, or this new normal that we set? No, we need to also reset and build back a new political system, a new kind of system in there, take the chance to do that, because those people couldn't handle this. Otherwise, they would have handled it already, and we wouldn't have had the issue getting so bad where we need something new. That's that's something that I hope people can take from society, from this experience, I think.
We'll talk more about it in the next videos we do, but that book, Walden, delves heavily into that theme of when Thoreau lived by Walden Pond in a cabin for, what was it, 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days or something. And one of the themes that Edward was telling me about is it sort of gets into foreshadowing. It was written much earlier, but what Nathaniel Branden and Ayn Rand talked about with social metaphysics, as far as the idea of you have to live alone, you have to be self-reliant, but also not have other social relationships. So how do you survive in that kind of environment? And one of the themes apparently it gets into is how do you, like, it gets you to sort of re-examine how many of your relationships did you really need versus how many were out of convenience, how many were out of insecurity, all this. And then it's like, oh, I when I come back to civilization, I want to see these people again because they were actually valuable, versus, okay, these were just people that happened to go to my school or work in the same place, but were they adding that much to my life? Probably not. And I think that sort of exercise really puts that into perspective. Now, in modern times, I'm not suggesting go out in the woods or something, but I think those ideas of like go travel somewhere on your own, move to a new place, do something like that, because then that really puts into perspective, what do you want? How are you going to get there? What kind of relationships do you want, et cetera, et cetera. So,
yeah. And despite the negative things that I've talked about, as I mentioned, we tend to focus on the negative. I think there's going to be a majority of people who have taken this opportunity to get closer to certain people, to reevaluate the things that they care for, to have certain things they thought, okay, maybe I should move, maybe I should change this out, but they were so pot committed and just going in momentum that now that this pause happened, they've been able to restart things. And I think it's going to be some promising time. I think if you try to make the case for liberty, for individualism, self-reliance, I'm so glad we went to get to that reading next. Like, I think, like, this is what I was wondering if I was listening to that book, like that essay when I was a kid and back holding my friend's hand. I don't know if I would have taken it in the same way. I was like, no, I don't want to be self-reliant. I want to hold her hand. but it's taken some time. It was a tough time, mental crisis, to break down and then build myself back, get to self-knowledge, where once you have that self-knowledge and you're comfortable and you like yourself in general, then you don't have to question why someone would like you. Because if you dislike yourself and then, or if you're not comfortable with yourself, you find all these negative things in yourself, and somebody says they like you, you start saying, why do you like things I don't like? And it starts questioning, like, what is that person seeing? Like, do they like bad people? Because you consider yourself a bad person. But once you're somewhat comfortable in yourself, then you can also be comfortable when other people are accepting you. Then you're comfortable with certain things that you're good at and you're bad at. You can take criticism. It's like, yeah, you know you're wrong in something, but I was talking about this earlier, how some people think being wrong means you're somebody who's an enemy. Or if I say you're wrong about something, I mean you're my enemy. Not necessarily. You can be in a situation where, yeah, I understand I can be wrong about this, but there's all these other things I'm right about, other things I'm positive about. So you get into that kind of situation, and it's it's a tough kind of situation to be in, and at least it's tough. I don't know. Just let us know also how it's been for you. What are the things that you changed? And with that self-reliance thing, I think just like I wouldn't really been able to understand it back then, and I do now in a different way when I actually read it. I think if you look at people, let's say there was 1 million people pre-pandemic listen to that essay, they would not be as open to it. I think maybe there would be 100,000 open to it. I think now post-pandemic, could maybe be 250,000 who are open to it because they've considered self-reliance in a different way and have more questions about the reliance on the structures that they thought were the things that were actually holding them up. Now they realize, no, it actually was me. It was my group. It was my people. It was myself, the thing that we're doing. So I think that's a good place to be in.
Yeah, two other comments, just sort of funny anecdotes. What you said a little while ago, I remember what Edward said to me a while back, where I would have these statuses referring to my friends by different nicknames, and one of my Facebook friends was like, "Why do you say this? Normal people say such and such." And Edward says regarding me, he goes, "If he was normal, I wouldn't talk to him." I was like, and then the other thing is there's this recurring joke with my parents about they talk about how all my female friends are really intense except for Dina. Dina's like the nun saintly type. But it's funny because my parents, the way they say it with their personalities, like mom is just, all your female friends are nuts. Like she just says that. And then dad is talking to my grandmother. He goes, Stephen has a number of lady friends and some very interesting ones. Like it just shows in how their personalities, how they both say the same thing. And I was like, but that's what it is. I'm like, I like interesting people. Like I don't like boring people. Basic people are just boring to me. Like I don't hang out with people like that.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Wait,
Moving on.
okay. One more
What
thing.
you got? Yeah,
I
sure.
did
Go ahead.
mention the people who have had struggles being back. But then now there also is a cohort of people that are very, and this could be in part, they say some of the people felt like they were part of something bigger, like all they had to do was just follow instructions and they were saving all these old people and saving the world and being a good part of the thing. And then now they're going back to a more mundane kind of life. So for some of those people, just simply going back and not having that status that was conveyed to them by being this world saver and going through this massive pandemic, being this COVID survivor type of thing, that's kind of being lost. So they're kind of, and you can see some politicians. Look at with Cuomo, look at with Whitmer, look what's happening with even with Fauci and Birx to a lesser extent. Newsom over there, their status was being this big, brave warrior of the COVID, being against Trump, and now those things are gone, and they seem to be waning in status. But there's also some people who have gone home and have found that there was actually value in different kind of environments. Now they're being put back into places that they thought they had to be in, that they realize, I don't like these people, I don't like this work, I don't want to be in this place. And there's also that tension. So yeah, we mentioned before the certain group that struggled by being back, certain group are struggling by going back. And then I think, to me, part of my main focus is going to be focusing on that cohort that I said that changes from the 100,000, that 25,000 now, 250,000 now, that are more open to the case of liberty and trying to find new ways to do things, because that's coming regardless. So we might as well take a part into it and try to message and see which are the people that we can influence and learn from to do things in a more positive way than has been done in the past. Yeah.
All right, moving on. Romantic love. Our romantic relationships are served by specific adaptations in our brain. Sexual desire puts us on the playing field. Romantic love solves the problem of committing strongly to one person. Religion taps into this and creates a love relationship. It is reflected in the promise to Muslim martyrs that they shall be married in heaven. Again, that depends on the sect. Some are promised virgins, other are promised marriage. I don't want to generalize with Muslims too much because there's different sects. The late Sheikh Yassin, Hamas's spiritual advisor, said it was okay for women to be suicide bombers, particularly if they were single, because they become, quote unquote, even more beautiful than 72 virgins. They are guaranteed a pure husband in paradise. Now, yeah, I don't agree with it, but now, of course, the promise of 72 virgins is more about appealing to a man's libido rather than his romantic love. Capacities for sorry.
There's also one thing with those virgins. Some translations say it might be dates.
Oh, okay.
Like the fruit dates, not like dates with women.
Capacities for romantic love are utilized extensively in religion. Mother Teresa wrote about, quote unquote, being married to Christ. In medieval times, nuns' consecration ceremonies were essentially weddings, complete with dowries for the church. As a way the church got money. Even today, many nuns still call themselves brides of Christ, and some even take their final vows in wedding dresses and even receive and wear wedding rings. In a one-woman show called Letting Go of God, the one-time Saturday Night Live comedian Julia Sweeney reveals that in her youth, a painting of Jesus helped her relieve her sexual longings. I didn't see that, but it sounds kind of interesting. The attachment system, as was discussed in Chapter 3, is deeply involved in our romantic relationships. We go from desire to intense romantic infatuation to companionate love, with the last stage being based on the attachment system. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, I guess Jesus is a polygamist, then, according to some of these people. I don't know how God feels about that. Monogamy is God's plan for us. Okay, yeah, so again, this is, but I wonder, romantic love, this is rather subjective. It's something that is also rather contemporary, it's rather recent. I think the aspect of romance comes more with choice and wooing and things like that. Like, people wouldn't consider two deers out there, reindeers going out and having their tussling thing, and then having the female see them and then get an estrus, and then the female picks the male that wins. I don't think they'd consider that romance, but when they see like a man going out there and battling another man, or for the woman's honor and things like that, this person says, "Well, this woman said something. This man said something to my date. So I had, if you're a man, you have to, at that point, you have to punch someone." Like, eh. And some people are like, "Oh, that's so romantic." Like, so there's that thing where there's some basic kind of things that I don't consider necessarily. Mate guarding is different. Mate guarding and mate guarding and displaying of fitness, displaying of strength and power and strength and that kind of thing is separate, I think, from romance. Romance to me is like the flowers and the trying to get to know about the person, trying to get more of an emotional connection to that person. And I think that comes more with choice, where in the past it was like, okay, you're going to marry this person, it's an organized marriage. You can try to be romantic, but it doesn't really affect too much. It's
Yeah.
beneficial for you to have romantic feelings with somebody, and sometimes those things grow, but it wasn't necessarily a deciding factor to who you are reproducing with. It was like more like you have this select group of people to choose from. You better pick somebody. And even with, as I mentioned in the previous one, uh, in this book, The Moral Animal, they talk about Darwin and how he met his wife Emma and things like that. And he was picking between four women, and I think 3 or 5 women, and like 3 or 4 of them had already married off. And then he got to the point where he first decided, I'm going to get married. And then once he decided he's going to get married, he went out and looked at the possible suitors, and Emma was one of the available ones. And then he started reaching out to her, and she was like, I'm not quite sure. And he was like, okay, no. He started making overtures with letters, and then once she actually accepted, he started getting more deeper into it. He was more pot committed. And then now people kind of talk, and something that's happened since I was as a kid was people talking about the difference between romance between men and women. And it's like when a man actually likes a woman, they seem to dedicate themselves a lot more emotionally to it. Yet women are more, in general, care about more of the receptions. Maybe that's just because men propose and women dispose and that kind of thing with the monkey branching. And I'm kind of rambling now. but then there's also the kind of thing where this might be tied more into the financial system, because I want to see how this matches in systems that are not as resource provision and biased family wise towards the woman, the female, where the man is getting wages garnished to maintain the woman's life, or the kids are taken away, because the suicide rates of men post divorce are far higher than women, but in general, suicide rates of men are far higher than they are of women. So maybe that's something also to do with like the status of being seen as a failed husband versus being seen as a failed wife, which is the onus is more put on the deadbeat dad, or the dad who failed, versus deadbeat mom, or the woman who is more responsible for the breakup. I don't know how those things break in, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and
That
well,
was
it's
my
interesting
rant.
too. You mentioned about the arranged marriages, but I always bring up that like people always had lovers and things on the side. Like, you have a relationship with a stable boy or a milkmaid. But then what I'm wondering is that lust or is that romance? Like, is it just, oh, the stable boy is this in shape, good looking guy, so I'm gonna sleep with him? Or is it like, is there some actual personal attraction between them? It's just they can't live it out because of diplomacy. I don't know. It's like that's one of those things. Like, I guess you have to look at almost on a case by case basis or something.
Yeah, I
Uh,
also I remember there was a part in The Moral Animal they were talking about the difference between a man imagining their spouse sleeping with somebody, their partner sleeping with somebody else, ticked off a
yeah.
different kind of thing in their mind, versus a woman imagining their partner having like emotions and having courtship with another female and things like that, giving her time versus just sleeping with him. That's a different kind of thing. And but they also tied that into a thing where if there is a actual child that comes from that coupling or that dalliance with the man, there's a chance of them having to raise another man's child for 18 years and give the resources to them, yet the woman will know, like, that's not my kid. So they're not going to be
Yeah.
completely like tied to actually supporting like the result, the potential eventual result of that dalliance. So it's part of it. Yeah.
This sort of actually leads into the next section.
Okay.
Parental investment. The female has the greatest parental investment. Think about the demands on a woman to support and birth a child. A man just has to provide the sperm. It could be argued too that culturally more burdens are on the mothers in terms of parenting. We can debate some of this, but that's what the author is saying. The woman's selectiveness of mates is what prevents a man from mating nearly indefinitely. Some have even argued that this is why men have tried to control female reproduction. So it's why things like polygamy, insisting that women wear black head to toe, and even more brutal practices like clitorectomies and infibulations. This also explains why it was common practice for the winners of the war to rape the females of the losers. Religious belief appears to be an important factor in our culture of monogamy, which results in more competition among both sexes to secure a suitable mate. Consider this line often said at Christian weddings: "What God hath joined together, let no man set asunder." In 2009 study of Arizona college students show that both men and women appear to have an increase in religious feelings when shown pictures of attractive members of their own sex, but not members of the opposite sex. Thus, when competitiveness for potential mates comes into play, so does religion. And then the author says here in quotes, most religions are preoccupied with sex, and that in itself offers strong evidence that religion is man-made. So far, we have explained the psychological building blocks of belief and ritual as a byproduct of adaptive cognitive mechanisms. But also, we also now have evidence from the studying of our brains, and that's what the next chapter is going to be about.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, with the parental investment, as I mentioned, that is in a different situation where it's based on certain information and it might be some disagreements, but part of the reason why the courts seem to award the children to the parents, to the mothers, because they have that. And then there's people who are on the feminist side who are saying, oh, we need to free women from this. But then there's also an aspect that genetically we've selected for women that get some higher endorphins benefits from actually engaging in parent. It's part of the biology of the female animal to reproduce. Like it's in there. Like it's and then there's a definition between like when it comes down to simple biological, the female versus the male. It's like whichever of the species or any dimorphic, sexually not necessarily sexually dimorphic, but with the species in general, like whichever of the species has the larger reproductive organs, because the female and the male, that's just the basic biology of it. But regardless, that aspect has been by some people told to be a thing that you don't really care about, yet invariably it seems to be a lot of people who are indoctrinated into that mindset as children. A big percentage of them get to a certain age and then they start saying, now that I've achieved all these things, let me get into that. And then now they get in that point where, as many people have mentioned and discussed, they project the things they find attractive in a mate and say, oh, but I have all these degrees. I'm making six figures. I have this kind of status. Why can't I find a man? Well, men are not attracted to that. You might be attracted to that in men, but you're not attracted in that kind of way. They're more attracted in the ability to have the reproduction because they're also understanding that females have some ability and some nature to be motherly. So that's what they look for. They look at someone who's going to be able to invest time in raising their children and be that motherly being and nurture them in that kind of sense. So if they're saying, I physically can't do that, so I'm going to bring the status, the resources, the kind of level in society, if we're both bringing that to the table and you've far reduced your strength and fitness, physical fitness and ability and birthing time to have healthy kids and parent them and focus on them, that's going to reduce your desirability in the sexual marketplace. So this is an aspect. So that one I kind of agree in some senses, and of course the simple biological physical aspect, females do a lot more with the 9 months of gestation. That's just it's invariably. I think they also just recently heard there was some person. Let me see if I can remember. I think I wrote down the name of this individual. The person who was found. I know they say that thing with like Genghis Khan supposedly has some of the most kids. Like some of the most people. The people can find the most genes of Genghis Khan. Like can track them down in the most number of people in the world. I think they said something like that. But there was a particular individual that I forgot. I didn't write down the name of the person, but they mentioned in the book there's some Arab person during his life. He was found to have fathered like 862 children. 862.
I think I have heard of who you're talking about, but I forget the name. And well, Charlemagne, they've said similar things about too. Like there's a joke about how, he's metaphorically, but also biologically the father of Europe because he passed. They say a lot of Europeans today. Yeah,
that is crazy. 862 people. He died when he was alive. Like that is crazy. So a man can do that, but if a woman, even if she was pregnant her entire life, like this from time of pregnancy, let's say 16, she was just constantly pregnant. You have to give a few months for like post birth. So if she had one every year, it'd be like 80 at most. If she got to like 90, like 100 years, but people don't have the reproductive period to get that past. Like realistically, it's around 45. Then back then, you're past 45 to like 55. You have kids, like 50% chance that kids are going to be born, let alone born healthy. Like even 45, even lower than 45. It's like only 35 is like ostensible wall and things like that. So if a woman at most pre-menopause, with most preferable situations, if she was having a kid every year, it'd be about what, 30 kids at most? Not even. It's like,
Probably, yeah.
yeah. So the investment, the physical investment that they do actually isn't a lot more, and it makes sense that if you're going to physically put that much time into it, there's going to be chemical, biological things that select for you to be more effective and dedicated to that actual process, and selective in getting a situation where you can focus on that more. And that's one of the things I think from a young age I started thinking, like, part of the reason women in certain societies and cultures are really as tense as they seem to be is because they're not able to really attend to just the general biological realities of being a mammal, being a life form. Like most other animals, lower beings that don't have culture and society, when the female is in menstruation, they address that either by mating, or they're allowed to leave whatever kind of society organization. They don't just keep doing things as usual, like they're just not going through one of the primary reasons that they're alive. But human beings are like, yeah, we're just women. We're just going to keep getting women out in the workplace, and they should just work every day like it's the same. No, they can't. They should be some attention to that, because that's the reason we're all here.
Well, and also, I remember I used to debate this with certain feminist types about, like, are men or women pickier with partners? Of course, I argue women, but it makes sense because it's like we say, there was a game, I don't know if you ever played the Duke Nukem games, but there's one where
Yeah.
all the men on Earth get killed except for Duke Nukem, then he has to repopulate the planet. So at the end, it shows he's in the White House. But the thing is, conceivably, a man could do that. But if it was one woman remaining and it was just men, well, she can only house one baby or a set of babies at a time. So it's like a man's seed can spread everywhere, and like there's less there's financial investment, but at a biological level, it takes a lot less out of him. Whereas with a woman, like we say, one woman, it's like she'd have to have one kid, wait 9 months, a little bit to recover, have another one, wait, ever recover. And it's like, it's a higher cost to her physically. So that's why women have to be more selective, because it's a much bigger cost on them.
I do not remember this being a storyline, the Duke Nukem
Yeah,
story.
it was
What?
Land of the Babes, it was called. That was one
Okay,
of his.
okay, so not the first one.
No.
Okay, I only
It was
played the
one of the.
first one. I didn't play that one. But with that same storyline, there's this comic book called Y: The Last Man that I suggest to anybody who likes stories and stuff like that. It's of that as well, where he's the last man on Earth, and there's just women everywhere. Like, I don't know, I forget, it was some disease or something that made him pass away. I remember reading it like 15 years ago or something, but it was pretty entertaining. Still stuck with me. But the golden womb, the golden uterus, and the tin sperm, or the sperm is nothing. It's a throwaway type of thing. If you in the past, when you were living in societies of 100 people, if it was 100 females and 100 males, and you had some kind of battle or some kind of disease came through, and you had 49 of the females died off, that civilization, that society was in a few generations to be over. If you had a similar situation, 49 of the males died off, that society, that culture could be back to 100 number population in a matter of generations. So that's the difference. It's just a biological fact. When it comes to simple biology, an individual female is in general more worth to the species' existence than any individual male. But there's a caveat. I think a man through their actions could technically be considered more valuable both to the males and the females in that society than any one particular female, due to just certain practicalities of different body strengths and capabilities and drives and needs and things like that.
Yeah. It manifests itself in a different form. I think that's what you're getting at. Like
Yeah.
basic biology versus leadership and getting resources, and where does he take the civilization? It's a little more complicated, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
That's the end of that chapter. I don't know. Did you have anything else, or
No, I think we're good to
Yeah,
go. I think
yeah,
that's been a
sure.
good chapter. I enjoyed that
Cool.
one. The dream part was cool. I think it's
Cool.
a good direction. I'm super excited to see where we're going. The way we're doing this, I haven't read the book. I don't really look forward. Steven took some notes and we just kind of go as we go. So I'm not peeking forward. I'm looking forward to seeing where we're going to go in the last two chapters. Anything you want to say to finish off?
I was just gonna say the last chapter is pretty short. This next one is long, like this one, so maybe we'll do the last two together. We'll see.
Okay.
But I think this next one it was very interesting. Probably one of the most. I don't know if I would say it's the most interesting part of the book, but it's. I feel like this book, like it was kind of a crescendo. Like as it went further and further, it became more interesting. So I think that's really cool. All right, but that's all I have for this for now. So until next time.
Yeah, same here. Goodbye, people. Steven
Goodbye,
Destino.
everyone. Thanks.
Son bajas de tipo de clima,